It's the appointed hour. The appointed hour to start the meeting, 8 a.m. I'm not sure how we get the approvals, whether both committees have to approve the agenda or one. Jewel, how does that work?
We usually do it as a whole,
As a whole?
Okay.
but I would like to note that we do not have a quorum of the CIP meeting without Ms. Sursakar present yet.
Say that again?
Ms. Sursakar is not here yet, so we don't have a quorum of the CIP meeting for the CIP committee.
I thought the new rules is that Terry
Well,
Allen can be on the CIP committee.
Yes, Mr. Allen can be an ex officio member of the CIP committee. We can barely hear you, Mr. Koblis. I'm sorry.
What if we don't want to allow Mr. Allen into our committee?
Let's roll with that. That sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
Do I have a motion to approve the meeting agenda?
I'll move. Sean.
All in favor? All right.
Aye.
Okay, I guess we move to the first action item, approval of the 2024 capital spending plan.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Darren Geldert, and I'm going to be presenting here solo today. Tom can't make it. But I'm really pleased to present to you all the 2024 capital spending plan and our 10-year CIP. We're going to walk through this in pieces, talk a bit about some of the significant projects that are out there. But it really is part of our budget process and part of our long-term vision for Loudoun Water. And it starts with this one-year capital spending plan, which is our most detailed look at what we know we're going to do. Then we also review the 5 and 10-year plans. And this process is combined with the operating budget. So this will be presented at the December 14th meeting and be tied into that operating budget. And that's when you actually approve it. So today is informational. And actually, the only other note I'll make is that this is a spending plan. It's not a budget, but it's the closest thing we have to a budget for our next year's spending. So the capital improvement plan, just to kind of work on from the outline, it's our 10-year vision of what we need. There are approximately, I think, 212 projects identified that help meet the needs of Loudoun Water over the next 10 years. We've gone through this process starting with all of the staff. They start building up project sheets, an itemized list of all these different projects. Each project is then described with a scope, what the drivers are, why do we need it. It's prioritized based on a longstanding kind of prioritization schedule that we use. And then there's added to that kind of the scope or the budget and the schedule. And over time, every year we come back to you with this, and every time it changes a bit. But this is really a plan that represents the priorities of the entire organization. It includes IT projects, it includes rehab and repair, it includes a lot that deals with growth. And it also includes projects that span all phases, from basically an equipment purchase to the traditional design, bid, build, construction projects. If you looked at the budget, you'll notice right away, this year is a big increase again. Our current spending for this year is approximately $90 million. It'll be about 80% of the 110 that we originally approved last year. So that means we're planning to spend about $50 million more this year than we did last year. And of course, we probably just like you looked at that and went, wow, that's a lot of money. Can we really do it? And then we looked at what projects are included in that. And you'll see projects like the quarry that you'll hear about more in a few minutes. And And others that have a real high likelihood of spending, they're moving into construction instead of design, so the value increases a lot. And these are largely projects that we have under contract, and so this is just a continuation of that spending, albeit at an increased rate. We'll also look at the 5-year CIP. This is used more by finance to look at the rate structure, look at our need for borrowing, look at how this impacts availability fees. And the last thing I'll note is just any of the monies that we show here, any of the spending that we show is for now net of any grants or other outside funding. So we do have a grant related to the quarry. We get outside funding for the county on certain projects. Those we haven't shown here, that isn't really an impact to our ratepayers.
It was a $10 million grant, wasn't it?
Yes, $10 million.
That seems like it has some impact, right?
Okay, all I meant was it certainly has an impact, but in terms of the planning for how much our ratepayers are going to have to pay,
Gotcha.
we're looking at kind of the net spending there.
Can we find some more grant money out there? Is anybody looking?
I think that our team looks regularly for what's available out there. A lot of that is need-based, and Loudoun County doesn't always qualify for some of those.
And no infrastructure, nothing from that, from the Inflation Reduction Act that we can't. I know we've talked about this before, but
Well, we did a small grant on that funding through the for the lead and copper project, so that was one.
that was it. All right.
So this year, a lot of these projects have transitioned into construction, and that somewhat limits our ability to influence the spending as the year goes on. We try and facilitate the contractor as best we can, make sure they're meeting their schedules. But a lot of these estimates that we get from the contractor are based on their ambitious, aggressive schedules. And we try to review that and temper that and make sure we understand and make the best judgment that we can as to what they're actually going to spend. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we move through. But I was going to walk through the capital spending plan, which is what we kind of know best. That's next year, and walk through some of the significant projects and what we see on the horizon. As we review the capital spending plan and our CIP, we've for many years broken up our projects into broad categories. You can see them listed on the screen. It includes our treatment and supply, reclaimed water, the community systems, administrative and facilities, which includes IT projects, general water and wastewater, that's our pipelines and pump stations, and finance. And we have a variety of projects scattered throughout all of those different groupings. You can see relatively few projects in like the Potomac water supply, that's the quarry, there's a lot of spending there, but relatively few projects. If you move down to the water and wastewater, you'll see a lot of projects with somewhat less spending. It's a balance because we have projects anywhere from a plan to some manhole rehab to large projects like the Broad Run expansion. The finance projects, and we'll touch on that in just a minute, those are fairly consistent year after year in that $30 million range. But this is an ambitious schedule. When all of our staff first presented all of this, it was actually a much higher number and more projects. But as we looked at our spending, as we looked at our resourcing, which is often the most critical for us, do we have the staff to complete these projects? We've narrowed it down to this list.
I have a quick question while we're on that subject. I know you said you scaled it down. You know, back a couple of slides, you talked about, staff sits down and prioritizes things. And then they rise to the top. Has that been tweaked at all? Going forward, we're spending so much money. Has that metric changed where there's a higher bar to do some of these projects than normally there would have been 3 years ago? Or are we still looking at everything in the same lens as far as prioritization that we have in the past?
I would say it's essentially the same lens. However, when you come to the scoring, we start looking at what we can accomplish. Essentially more falls off the list. In terms of what's important to our level of service, what's meeting our strategic plan, what we need to deal with growth, those type of priorities, whether or regulatory safety, those haven't changed too much. What does happen though is we put a more critical eye on those projects that are on the edge and try to then say, can we actually resource these? It's a long process that we go through to prioritize this. And in fact, it's a multi-step process where there's an initial screening by each project manager and department head as they get the project sheets, and it's reviewed then. And then we have a team of all of the directors and some upper management that get together throughout October and through a series of meetings. And we actually walk through and discuss every single project and make sure that we understand the scope and the needs. Because those priorities, while they are, it's a good prioritization schedule, sometimes it's a little tricky to figure out exactly where they balance. If we're buying a new truck versus putting in a new manhole, what's more important? So that's a balance, and we get that whole team together to help make sure that those priorities match what we need. Sure.
In terms of the administrative facilities projects, there's 36 projects. Could you speak on what some of the larger projects be in that category?
Sure.
Trying to get a
And
sense.
in fact, I'll get to that in just a minute
Okay.
as I kind of step through.
Is there a slide on that?
Yeah, there's a little bit, and I'll talk a little bit more than what's on the slide,
Okay.
but I'll kind of walk through these different categories now and talk at least a little bit about what the significant projects are in those different categories. And if we start with the finance is largely fixed spending, you could say, or spending we don't control. That's our debt service, that's reimbursements to developers, and that's capital funding we reimburse to DC Water, Fairfax Water, and Fairfax County, UOSA, for treatment services and for capital improvements at their facilities. We pay a percentage or a prorated cost related to those improvements. If you look at the water and wastewater group, some of the significant projects, and these are projects that have already come through the board and you're largely familiar with, I believe. Obviously, there's Reservoir Park. We've put that in our water category because it's right on our drinking water reservoir. Many of these projects, though, could span multiple groups. You could say Reservoir Park might almost be a facility for us. We've also included the Lansdowne Sewer Pump Station reliability upgrade. That's another major project in our wastewater spending. That's also currently in construction. That spending is pretty much, we know it's going to happen. And then we're starting to see more and more spending related to the JLMA or related to the western part of our service area where we're seeing significant growth. You recently approved the Goose Creek Industrial Park Sewer Pump Station. That's now under construction, and so we'll see a huge increase in spending next year related to that project. And that's another one where that is an existing wastewater treatment plant that's actually essentially a community system. It's going to be connected into our central system, giving us some long-term savings in operations and maintenance. And it's also being sized, though, to consider the JLMA and the growth in the western part of our service area. If you move into the reclaimed water, community systems, administrative facilities, there's a number of different projects there. The main one that's the biggest spender in our admin and facilities is the SAP upgrade that's coming. And that is I believe, under contract, and it's approximately $10 million of spending next year.
So is that 10 million in the community systems or is it an admin?
That would be an admin.
Okay.
Yeah. Other projects that are in the admin facilities, I know we're doing a warehouse study to make sure we have enough space for all our spare parts. That also includes some of the more minor, I'll say minor, more like equipment purchases for replacement of technology. It includes upkeep related to these buildings, paving and so on. It includes a wide variety of projects.
So for admin, if you strip out the 10 million for the HANA upgrade, it's 9 million is what's left over.
Yeah, about that. right?
Yeah, 8.9,
Mhm.
which was Keith's question, I think.
Yeah, so most of it was related to the SAP system upgrade, et cetera.
The biggest one cost is the SAP upgrade. Other big spending there includes vehicle replacements. I can't remember which one they're buying this year, but occasionally they're buying a large like sewer vac truck or something like that, which is $500,000 or more. There are a number of initiatives that get tied into that, but a lot of it is related to IT and operations technology, replacing those facilities as we move through.
The HANA upgrade, that's complete next year. That's full cost, or is it dip into
I believe that's a 2-year cost,
your cost?
a total of 12 million, I believe.
Okay.
Most of it is next year.
Next year.
And there's a new roof in there too, right? Is that
Yep.
admin?
Depending on where it is. So if the roof is at Broad Run, which I know we're doing some of that, that will be under the Broad Run category. I think any of the other facilities roofs are not in this group. I think, I don't know if you've seen or not, but we'd be glad to show you all the project sheets now or whenever that detail all of the projects that are on there. And I believe in Board Docs, there's a list at least of all the projects sorted by category. The other big one in the community systems that you'll see a lot over the next few years is the ammonia removal upgrades. This is a regulatory driven project that's going to impact all of our community system wastewater plants. Will somewhat be probably rehab at the same time, but it's mostly just dealing with this new regulation that's underway. If we look at the Potomac water supply, that's going to be one of our biggest spenders and one of the biggest changes that we've had, because as this moves from design and we're spending something like $3 million this year, next year we're going to be spending close to $40 million just related to that milestone reservoir construction. This is one of the projects, and Sam may talk to this later, where we've had a little bit more uncertainty in the spending schedule. This is a type of construction we don't usually do. It's also under a different contracting mechanism through the CMAR. So we've made our best review of the contractor's schedule and what we think they can accomplish and have put this in. This is one of the projects, like other major construction projects, where we have a little bit less influence on the pace of their spending. And this is where you may see a variation at the end of the year. And then we also have Broad Run, and there will be significant spending in the Broad Run plant over the next 10 or more years. Next year, we have the construction, which is under contract still, and that's essentially wrapping up most of the phase 2 expansion. And then we have phase 3 design well underway, and those are both major projects that I believe are already approved and underway. So if you look at most of these projects that we've highlighted, most of them are existing projects. They've come through the committee, come through the board, and you will see any new spending over, I think, $100,000 come back through the committee. So this isn't an approval of these budgets. This is authorization for us to move ahead with this and plan around this. If we looked at the spending in a lot of different ways to try and see where it sits in its current phase, where we think it's going to be, and where it sits in some of our priorities. If you look at the spending plan, we've kind of estimated that over 70% of our spending is somewhat fixed or somewhat out of our control. They're finance that's required to pay our debt service, and then a lot of it is spending that's construction. The equipment other has a big jump this year. That is due to that $10 million related to the SAP upgrade.
What is transition to construction?
That's a project that we expect to move into the construction phase in the next year. It's currently in design, but we know that the design is wrapping up or it's getting close to going out to bid. So we anticipate that it should transition into a construction phase during the year. We look at the drivers for each of these projects and kind of set them in broad categories. You can see that of that $140 million, most of our spending is still related to growth. So that's the quarry project, that's the Broad Run expansion, that's a lot of the work out in the western part of our service area to deal with the JLMA. But there are actually a number of drivers that make us do projects. We're getting more and more projects that are related to asset management, asset renewal and replacement. That's your standard, it's worn out, we need to fix it and replace it. We're still a relatively young system, which is fortunate for us, but we will see more and more of that as we move through the years. We do have joint projects with Loudoun County. While those aren't huge in terms of spending, they're critical for us in terms of our relation with the county, and it's a commitment we've made to them through different programs. We're continually upgrading and making sure we have the technology that we need to support our staff and is kind of expected by our customers. And then some of it is straight regulatory driven. And sometimes we're also trying to consolidate our into the central water sewer system to make things more efficient. Community systems generally cost a little bit more than if we can connect them into our larger central system. If you look at just the number of projects, you can see that we have quite a few projects related to renewal and replacement. We're also a fair number of projects still related to growth and reliability. We are still definitely a growing system. When the county added service area over the past few years, that's definitely impacted how we look at projects. So that was kind of a look at the 1-year capital spending plan. That's where we have the most certainty, and that's where we know the most about what's going on. Most of those projects, I would say, are actually underway. They're either in construction or they're in design. They're largely things that are continuations of the prior year. We technically have, I think, 20 new projects in the next year. However, some of those new projects that we may show up as a new project number, they're actually continuations of existing projects, and we're just using that to track and better follow the spending. I'll pause just for a second if there's any questions on that first part.
One other follow-up question on SAP, just was a little bit mildly surprised that it was in capital spending. So that is a depreciable asset.
Correct.
Okay. Just want to make sure. It's going to add to our depreciation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it will. Yes.
All right. Thanks.
Mhm.
Thanks, Brian.
When we start talking more of depreciation and assets, that's when I turn to finance. And in fact, when we look at the 5 and 10-year plans, it is a plan for us. I'm more in the engineering side for us to look at in terms of resourcing and make sure we're meeting the needs in terms of our master planning and our strategic plan, that we have the facilities there for the growth that we anticipate. But it's also a tool that's used by Brian, by the finance team. I'll turn it to him in just a minute. If you look at the 5-year plan, you'll see another increase in spending, but you'll also see that the spending over the next 5 years is I'm going to say relatively consistent, about $150 million a year. That's quite a bit. Most of the spending is, I'm going to say, in the growth range, and it's in that Potomac water supply, it's in the Broad Run expansion. If you look at the gray at the bottom, I'll work from the bottom up. That's a relatively consistent financial obligation we have to pay our debt and to pay our wholesale suppliers. The water and wastewater, that includes some amount of rehab and rehabilitation, but it's also dealing with new facilities that we're building to help serve the western part of our service area.
Everything that you have said is spending.
Hmm.
How about revenue? Have you, and I'm not a finance guy, so I'm maybe talking the wrong way. Have you ever done a stress test on revenue with different scenarios that, what if this revenue stream doesn't come about? Can we afford it? I don't know if I'm expressing it right, but.
Yes, that we work internally with our 5-year plan and with Davenport, our financial advisors, and do different sensitivity analysis as part of the 5-year plan. 2024 will also be the year where we go through another rate study, both for user rates and availability charges. And so we'll bring that to you in the fall of next year for approval. And this capital spending plan, the 10-year CIP, as well as the operating budget, will be included in that to see what the rate increase might need to be for the next 3 years, starting in 25.
So I just skipped ahead 2 slides because that's kind of related to exactly what Brian just mentioned and your question. I don't know if you want to speak any more to this slide now, Brian?
Sure. I think the main takeaway that we wanted to get across here is that the 2024 spending, which is what you'll be approving today and then at your December board meeting, does not change the time that you will need to borrow money in the 5-year plan. In the spring, the 5-year plan projected a need to borrow money in 2026. What you're seeing here today does not change that timing. The outcome and the size of that borrowing could well change over the next several years, again, with the results of the rate study and how much money we actually spend as part of the capital plan the next several years.
And I wanted to add and bring back to the question that you had, Mr. Allen, and that's, we are looking at larger projects, Broad Run Phase 3, and back to the question on, the prioritization and how we're having a lot more hearty conversations in these internal committees where we're looking at the deferral of projects and the, just greater scrutiny of the prioritization for the very reasons, Brian was describing here. We're headed into looking at rates and, we're looking at these larger projects. So I'm just trying to connect the dots here, but those conversations are being had in a very hearty way, I will say.
Can rates realistically do anything? I mean, we have 100 million in revenue, so we have a 3% rate increase. That's $3 million. That's like a drop in the bucket when you come to growth base for growth.
Yeah, I mean, I fully anticipate we're going to need to borrow money, and we've been projecting the need to borrow money for quite some time. The only change that will come will be the size of that borrowing.
So last time it was it
35, I believe, is what was.
What are we thinking now? Just, I know we don't know, but
It'll vary. I
Double
mean,
that?
I'm sorry.
double that?
It could be double that. Yeah.
Rates will be lower.
Mhm.
Why we're not
Yeah.
doing it today.
Yes. Yes. I think that was my main takeaway, is that we don't need to borrow money now when rates are extremely high. Yes.
It's good.
I went a little bit out of order here. I'll back up one. Just say, yeah, we look closely at that 5-year plan. And a team to Brian's, but you can see this year, we planned 110. We're going to spend probably around 90-ish. The next couple of years are actually pretty much tracking what we anticipated even last year. But then the outer years do increase. And I think that's with greater certainty of what we know about the expansion of Broad Run, what we've learned about the facilities related to the JLMA or the western part of our service area, and just the cost increases we've seen related to different projects as they come into construction, like the quarry and others. You can see this is a definite increase kind of in the same years if you looked at them through the same lens. And so we did put a close eye on those projects, and we've tried to push out or defer any projects that we don't see as critical to helping serve our customers. Sure. Oops, too many.
So for CIP, year 2025, 158, 158 million.
Mhm.
And then for 2024 to 2023, 33, it's 155.
Mhm.
It's a discrepancy there in amount.
Basically, every year we come back and we will reevaluate the costs, the schedules, the priorities.
Mhm.
And so last year's 10-year plan, which would be the 2023 to 2032 version, we anticipated in 2025 spending 158 million. This year, as we've come back and re-looked at the projects, where they're at, what we need, that number has adjusted. And so we've readjusted that total, and now it's 155.
Okay.
So every year we'll come back. Next year, when we come back and do this again, that 158 to 155, that may wind up being 160 or 140. I'm not sure. Some of that will depend on the pace of spending this year. If projects need to get continued into the following year. If SAP only spent 5 million, then we'd have to push that 5 million into next year's spending.
So
plan.
this is more like an approximate cost.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's definitely a plan
Right,
and not a budget.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Now, you mentioned that Broad Run has a major effect in what year, 2027?
I mean, broadband's going to continue to impact us through the years. I think there's a chart that you'll see in a little bit that'll help show that, I hope. But I mean, Broad Run's currently under expansion, so there's a lot of construction costs next year. And then we're into the heavy design. Moving from that design to the next phase of construction will take some time to finish the design, to bid it, to make sure we're doing the right amount of expansion.
I know
But
you
yeah, you're
actually
starting to
set
see
the
a lot.
project up so that you can revisit it.
Yep. You'll see that spending in the bar chart at the end, I think pretty clearly. So this was kind of what Brian just spoke to, and we always, I fully admit, I'm not the finance expert, and as soon as we start seeing these numbers, we turn them, and we're working in close coordination with Sally and Brian to make sure they understand what we're seeing coming and doing it to make adjustments.
You like to dump the problem on them.
They give us certain problems, we give them certain problems, yes.
Who's Devonport? Never heard of that. Consult with Devonport.
There are financial advisors. David Rose from Davenport presented the 5-year plan at the March Finance Committee and at the April Board Committee early this year. We've had a 30-plus year relationship with them. They're also the financial advisors for Loudoun County and the town of Leesburg. So they know us and our service area extremely well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I just want to go back to Marty's question. Brian, you'd mentioned the sensitivity analysis in terms of rates. I was just curious, how much does the board get involved with? I'm assuming there's various input variables into the models. Do you present those variables to come up with the various scenarios, or?
We usually present the one that we consult with Davenport with that we feel is the most likely scenario, but we will talk you through, different possibilities, but we're seeking your approval for a 5-year plan. And so that's the one that we formally present to you.
So we'll see like the net present value analysis and things of that nature. I'm just trying to understand what scope we'll be seeing.
Yeah, they run lots of different scenarios. They have software and.
Okay, so their model is.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yep.
So I thought what I'd probably walk through now is just similar to what we did in the 2024 capital spending plan is in this 5-year plan of finance or the 5-year CIP. walk through some of the major projects where the biggest ticket items are going to be over the next 5 years. You mentioned the Broad Run expansion, Marty, or Mr. Sultan, and you can see there, we start moving into the phase 3 construction in this 5-year plan. And the total spending there is going to be in the neighborhood of $100 million. The Milestone Reservoir is also a major spend in that $150–160 million range. We start looking at an expansion of Trap Rock. That expansion won't cost too much because it's mostly pumps and some electrical facilities. If you look in the water and wastewater section, a lot of this spending is going to be driven related to the western part of our service area, or the JLMA. And that's water mains, sewer mains, and also some pump stations. The Russell Branch Pump Station, the Goose Creek Industrial Park Pump Station are actually long-planned pump stations. We've had those on the books for a number of years. However, their sizing has definitely changed in relation to the new growth out in that area. Significant projects in the kind of across numerous divisions here. It's a little hard to categorize some of these, but the community systems ammonia removal upgrades is a major project in our community systems that is regulatory driven and will be something that you'll see. There we go. Okay. No problem. And so that's a major spending that you'll see over the next few years, moving through, I think, 5 of our different community wastewater plants. And we're starting to see a regular program of water and sewer main work, water and sewer main replacements as we age as a system.
Got 30 million for ammonia removal.
Yeah, it's a significant regulatory upgrade. We also have a number of.
I guess the question is, if it's 30 million, what for ammonia removal, what is that buying? What type of equipment?
I would defer that somewhat to our wastewater experts, but that is a major upgrade to all of the plants to deal with that. And it's through the design build contract. So I think we're still figuring out exactly what is going to be built.
Are these all surface discharge systems?
I believe they're all.
Yeah, they're predominantly surface discharging systems. Two of the major ones are the 2 lagoon systems in Waterford and St. Louis being replaced with membrane technology, and really just setting the course for the future of those facilities to be adaptable to any additional regulations that come along as well.
Are we partnering with the county on that, or is that just us?
It's just us. There's nuance to the Waterford facility in that it's interfaced with the projects that'll be going on with Waterford and Paonian Springs, but that'll sort of dovetail in with our project. We're making accommodations.
Thanks.
Okay.
There are also a number of significant projects that are partnership projects that are quite visible to us and to our to the county and to everyone around us. That includes Reservoir Park, which is in its, I think, kind of final phases of construction. And then there's the water wastewater program or county funded programs that we also, while this is not a huge impact to our budgets, it is an impact to our resourcing and our staffing, and we need to make sure we have the staff to deal with these projects. I'll just note, we have budgeted these in kind of accordance with what the county has budgeted. Paonian Springs, for example, you'll see a $2 million there over the next 5 years. If that actually moves into construction, the county will need to pay for that, and they will need to approve a budget for that, and then we will reflect that in our budgets too. And that would probably be $25 or $30 million.
The Howardsville treatment, That's sort of the rural side of London, right? Where we have wells and all that, right? Is that treatment part of that?
Howardsville's kind of a special site. So that is a very small old community where
Ah.
we have gone in now and built the collection system. However, because I think the flows and the loads there were so undetermined, we have waited on building the treatment system. But that is a commitment that we have with the county through a long-standing agreement.
And it is sewer only.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
So these numbers on the partnership projects, will we be reimbursed for all of these, or is this
Yeah.
our exposure? Reimbursed, okay.
We're reimbursed for all of that.
But they have to be in the CIP because we're gonna have the initial capital outlays ourselves, and then we get reimbursed.
Yes.
I have one question. As far as the system is young and aging, like the
Mhm.
rest of us. Pump stations and those type of facilities are relatively predictable.
Mhm.
What about water main failures and where is that taken care of? As the system gets older, you don't know what's gonna happen. Where is that taken care of?
That's a great question. So water mains are probably some of the hardest ones to predict.
Right.
But we do have our asset management team very actively looking at our water mains and developing programs for replacement. And that's based on the age and material of the pipes, the break history. We also have some new technology out there, basically listening for leaks and identifying where there are failures so we can get out there and dig it up on our schedule rather than the middle of the night. But yes, that's a long-term plan. I
Gonna
believe
get larger as you go.
it will get larger as you go. And as essentially, even in today's CIP, if you look in the 10-year plan, think of the number to make sure, but I believe we've basically budgeted $10 million a year for the next 10 years to replace water mains. We're starting in the oldest parts of our system in Sterling Park and so on, to try and get ahead of that and make sure we have a good program in place to maintain our system. And then finally, the significant projects also include regular finance projects. And this is our proportional payments to DC Water, Fairfax, our debt service, and so on. And again, that's around $30 million every year. If we look then at the 10-year plan, this is the same color coding you've seen and kind of the spending projected over the next 10 years. It's significant, around $1.5 billion or about $150 million every year. You can see in the outer years that spending is probably dominated by the expansion of Broad Run. That's that brownish orangish color. And the gray at the bottom is the finance. That's pretty consistent. The others vary through time. If you compare that with what we had projected last year, you can see that those bars last year, we were fairly similar in the next couple of years, but then in the outer years, we've been seeing a change. And a lot of that's related to a better idea of the timing, the cost, the scope related to Broad Run.
I have never seen a 10-year plan like that before. I went back and looked at like the last 15 CIPs we've done for a 10-year plan.
Mhm.
Last year's was pretty bad, but it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, we noticed that right away that it's a lot of spending, and that's why, we've turned
I
to
mean-
Brian and let them know.
I mean, in 2018, I looked at it and we had forecast spending 700 million in the next 10 years. Now we're spending twice that in the next 5 years, so
Mhm.
it's a big ramp up. I know everyone knows that, so beating a dead horse, but
Also related to growth as well, right?
we've
Mm.
We've had, the county's already gone through its huge growth spurt. We're kind of leveled off now, but maybe we're playing catch up. In my mind.
I'd agree with you. The only slight difference that we have now is that the 2019 comp plan expanded our service area. That service area is being filled largely with data centers, which are a high user. We also, this year, they approved the small area near Red Hill Road. So there's a small service area increase there. There was also the Dulles Western Lands by the airport, which is currently slated to be 10 or 12 more data centers that wasn't in our service area before. So there have been some growth-related changes that we probably didn't anticipate in 2018. Or I know we didn't anticipate in 2018.
Well, I don't think we anticipated a broad run in expansion in 2018 too. That's probably the line share of it.
Right.
Are we providing the water service for the new proposed development where the USTA tennis center is going to be? That's us. That's Leesburg.
Yes, that's us.
Okay.
That's the very northern end of the area that was given assigned to us in 2019.
That's in the transition zone, isn't it?
Transition, yes.
Wow. So we're moving into the transition zone.
Most of our, what we call the 600 zone is in the transition policy area. Yes.
Yeah, we've been in the transition policy area. That area was itself changed to transition policy from rural. That was kind of that little area that's up in that section right there.
So that's the area where we have best water pressure in the system. Is that right or no?
I think Darren would say it's good
Well, we had
everywhere,
to put
but it's the highest zone. Is that a good way to put it, Darren?
Yeah, it's our highest elevation zone. It basically takes the most energy to get the water up there. The pressures across our whole system are relatively consistent. We try to maintain that range of 50 to 80 PSI for everyone. Actually, if you get down by the river, it's a little bit higher. The elevation is lower, the pressure goes up. As we get up in the upper elevations, we have to boost the pressure to get up there. That's why we have the water booster pump stations.
But we had to build the tower to get that pressure, 600 zone tower.
The tower really helps maintain and provide reliability to that zone, yes.
You can do it either by a pump station or elevated storage, but you prefer elevated storage.
Yeah. Okay. So just a brief overview and summary of what I've kind of shown you here today. The 2024 capital spending plan, this isn't committing funding, but it's kind of setting that planning level projected budget. And this is $141 million net. If you look at the 5-year plan and the 10-year plan, we fully recognize it's significant spending, but we have gone through I think a rigorous process to look at and make sure that this is meeting the needs of the projected growth and of what our system customers require. Obviously, if the growth somehow stopped and nothing happened, all this spending would get delayed or pushed out.
So this would be, if you did a statement of cash flows, this is the cash outflow for these projects over 10 years. But what's actually going to hit, thinking of Davenport now, what's going to hit this is all capitalized. This is all long-term. So do you have a sense? I mean, is that the exercise when Davenport, debt service coverage and all the ratios we have to hit?
Yes.
That's what's going to happen. Okay. All right.
Just to pick up on Marty's question, if something catastrophic happened, whatever that disrupted this, do you prioritize these that, here's what we have to have, and some of these maybe we could delay?
Yes. Yeah. And that's why we relook at it every year.
Yeah.
Because if it comes, 1 year and it's 180 million, and we're, that's just not reasonable, then we go through and we're like, okay, these are the projects that we can put off. Maybe we don't get ahead of ourselves and spend
Yeah.
10 million on a pipe replacement this year because we need to build the quarry, you know, that's the exercise that we go through. Yeah.
Okay.
That's been a large theme in the Broad Run Phase 3 program is setting ourselves up to be nimble, light on our feet and make those kind of
Mhm.
pivots
Mhm.
because it is such a large program. So that's why you've seen these things broken into packages as we brought them forward. And so we're thinking along those lines with, I guess, our biggest program ahead.
So with Broad Run, is it fair to say that we could stop that project if we needed to, if we got to a certain stage?
In a sense, with each package and increment, we're building in that ability and
Okay.
anticipating
I
that.
think that's the way they set it up.
That's a little better.
Said that you can stop at various points.
I was with Keith Merlin last week at the Airports Authority. United is expanding significantly and they're projecting to add another 7,000 employees. That's just United. So I mean, there's a lot that's going to be continuing to happen here in the county, from many different sources. Yes.
How does that impact us?
Well, because you have a lot more growth and activity of
No.
people.
But
ERCs.
Yeah. When you have thousands of new people working in the county and living in the county, that. More homes, more water. All of it, that's right.
oh, okay, the overall all encompassing growth. Okay, I was just thinking from a land and water
No,
perspective.
these are just the fundamental drivers.
Okay, all right.
All right.
Happy to take any more questions, but
Are there any more questions?
If we have to, are we doing a finance side? I don't want to get into the finance stuff. No, we're not. If we have to borrow 60 million, let's say, do we anticipate that affecting our bond ratings?
No, you have debt capacity. We currently have, I think, only 4 bond issues that we're still paying off at the moment. So that was one of the highlights also that David Rose walked through, is that in the need to borrow, we have capacity that we'll be able to fill in. Yeah.
How much capacity?
I'll defer to David when he comes back in March.
Debt service coverage, if you recall, was over 2.
Well,
Mhm.
You were a lot of room. I mean, if you use that as
Right.
Mhm.
as your barometer, it's pretty strong.
We keep it artificially higher just to
Yeah.
get our ratings.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're right, it's, you look at 5 years ago, it's like double. I mean, it's
Mhm.
all right. Marty?
Can we get a motion? I'll make the motion. I move the committee endorse the 2024 capital spending plan as presented and recommend forwarding to the board for approval in December.
I'll second. Favor?
Do we get a roll call vote or just a voice vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion is passed.
Hey, Terry.
Before we go into the next one, the Milestone Reservoir, there have been a number of questions from various board members about the cost of this project and how we verify whether we're getting the best buy. And rather than divert this particular item, I'd like to throw it out to staff before the board meeting to try to come up with a better, with getting us an understanding of what this is costing. I know there are certain percentages that you've used. I, for one, like staff, I don't have familiarity with Seymour. So I don't have a good handle on what is a good cost, but I think before the next board meeting, and I'm willing to sit down with you and see if we could work something out, we need to come up with some kind of a better handle on whether these costs are the best that we can get, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think you know where I'm coming from. But I don't want to get in the way of these next 2 items, but I'd like to throw that out to staff. And like I say, I'm willing to come in and sit down with you and see if we could work something out. but I think it's needed. Anyway,
Mr. Sultan, I think there's been some additions made to this presentation. And so when we get to the end of the presentation, if we can revisit your request and see what we might be missing based on what they present today, then
oh,
we
it's
could do
added to
that.
this presentation?
I believe so,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, with that, with no further ado, can we have the next item? Approval of construction phase services task order for Arcadis.
Thank you, Mr. Sultan. Good morning, members of the committees. Today, I will present two requests for the committee here. The first one being for a contract amendment for engineering services during construction for Arcadis. Arcadis, as we know, has been the engineer of record since the inception of this project. The second request will pertain to Black & Veatch, who has served as our advisor during the CMAR pre-construction phase and supporting the design and development of new documents for our CMAR project. But this first item will cover the engineering services during the construction phase, get into some of the rationale for how we split roles and responsibilities between the two teams, and getting to some engineering fees and cost comparisons. So the drivers really have to do a little bit with how we typically run our projects, in spite of this being a somewhat, first time we do CMAR, somewhat unique delivery method from our perspective, or unusual or atypical, right? But we did start off from a standpoint of, what services would we need regardless, treating it just like any other construction project. And then from there, develop from the ground up a concept for handling some of the particular challenges of the project, which have to do with, there's a fairly large geotechnical component, big tunneling project. The CMAR aspect itself, obviously it's a large project for us, as pretty much as large as we've ever done in recent memory here. And so with those drivers in mind and the need to sort of prevent cost claims, delay claims, address the new operational needs of the facility upstream and downstream. It is a facility that will have impacts on trap rock as it delivers water to that facility, but also needs to interface well with the upstream Potomac water supply pump station over at the river. We sort of developed a set of needs to base our concept for CA services or services during construction across the board before even looking at who would handle what, right? And so with that in mind, we saw an opportunity to have Arcadis come back, as is our typical method, right? As a design engineer to support construction. They will have office-based support across all the disciplines of the design. That'll be, handling RFIs, submittals, pretty much the basic construction services that we've now come to expect from any other construction project of this type. They'll have a field presence through a resident engineer that'll serve as the liaison from the field to that office support, eyes and ears, report, handle as much of the engineering workload as that individual can handle, and then reaching out to office-based support as needed for some of the more complex problems and issues. But again, looking at the need for, supporting our geotechnical construction efforts, the big shaft and tunneling project, it's a large and sensitive aspect of the work. And so we identified the need there for having that geotechnical support component provided by the engineer, who also assisted in the development of the GBR, the Geotechnical Baseline Report, that is built into the contract for this project. And then being that it's a new greenfield facility that has the potential and really, the day-to-day impacts on both upstream and downstream facilities, large facilities for us. There is a big PLC programming, SCADA component. There are new standard operating procedures that need to be developed for this facility, right? We're not building on anything that was there before. And, training up staff on the new facilities, the new equipment that they'll be working with, et cetera. So those are sort of the main elements that we identified for engineering and technical services. And then during the next presentation this morning, we'll get a little bit on how Black and Beach is slated to come back here and provide some of the field-based construction administration and inspection support for us. More field-based, more of a need for us that we see in projects like Broad Run and some of our larger projects where we basically, don't have the ability to fully staff these roles with Loudon Water staff.
If there's a construction issue, I think in talking to Dalton, I think I got it right, but if there's a construction issue, who is the person that says this is the way we're gonna do it? Is that Arcadis?
Yeah, well, that really depends on the type of issue, right? But in the event of a need to interpret the contract to, for intent of the design, for instance, of course, Arcadis's, technical opinion would prevail above all. However, Black and Beach, and I'll get to that in the second presentation, being that they were so instrumental in developing our documents, our construction agreement, general conditions for this CMAR project, there will be items, as we've seen in other projects, that have to do with construction claims, delay claims, things of that nature, where it's more of a contract administration issue. And that we will have Black and Beach provide sort of, not only support and interpretation, but really sort of help arbitrate these issues between us, the contractor, and every other party who's involved in that, sort of, if you can imagine the CMAR as a administrator of subcontractors across all these different packages, there's going to be a lot of coordination to figure some of these issues out.
So Black and Beach is advisory, not anything more than advisory.
That's correct. I sort of view it as an extension of the work that we as project managers do.
And that's an important distinction. Sam already mentioned it, but he'll get into it further with the discussion on Black and Beach's task being just that, more of a staffing support to us to be able to staff this project. Clark's going to be marshaling a lot of resources to build this project, a lot of subcontractor effort. And so they are really going to support with the bandwidth on site, both administrative and field inspection staff to support us. So I do think that's an important distinction to make here and keep in mind as we progress through the presentation here. And one other distinction I think that is important with both of these tasks is this contract is a 52-month duration.
52 months, yeah.
So it is one of the longer, if not longest duration construction projects that we've done. So, just bear in mind that they're going to be supporting us for many years.
And Alton, if I may, I would also like to sort of contextualize it as a relevant point, right? What was just being discussed by Darren with regards to our plan for the next 5-10 years. There are a lot of other construction efforts that we'll be supporting during the 52-month period of construction here. So, that starts to get into the need for, additional inspection staff to support, which is not really atypical. It's not really that much different than what we're doing currently at Broad Run, right? With some of the haze and inspection that's supporting our own over there. But also, from the project management standpoint, we will have a lot of sort of projects in our docket to manage. And this really does help out with sort of shouldering that burden.
Well, what you're saying is it saves you from hiring extra staff.
And then figuring out what to do with them when the dust settles on these large projects.
Yeah, that's what my question was going to be. I know the ship has probably already sailed, but given the fact that these projects are so long, did we ever contemplate bringing some of this in-house? Would it be cheaper to hire 3 or 4 new engineers for the next 10 years than it would be to have all these consultants? I mean, I know it's probably past that point, but did we ever consider that aspect? And normally I would say no, because we have a project that lasts 2 or 3 years, but this is, these are long projects.
I think it's a balance. we've discussed it, we've deliberated it, at the GMO level, at the capital programs level, and we felt this proposal struck the right balance, and supported us in the best way.
I will also add that we do have 2 positions open in capital programs to hire project managers. It's tough to hire folks. I know, and on the inspection side too, it's hard to hire. As we bring folks on, we may find that we can use them to staff these projects. And you'll see as we go through the presentation, both Arcadis and Black and Beach, we are metering out, right, these task orders. We're not sort of giving them the whole fee up front. And if we find that we've brought some staff on that can help support these projects, we may use less of our consultant staff.
$6 million, I'm thinking you could have a lot of engineers on payroll for.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to make a similar point to what Savita just brought up, but I do want to focus, and I think we'll get into a little bit later, the geotechnical support, that specialty inspection for this project, for this need that frankly, it's an individual coming in with, 20, 30 years of experience to really help shepherd this part of the project along. Not somebody who will have a lot of demand after this project is done. And that's around $2 million worth of fee right there to support this particular project, right? So there's, like we've said, opportunities to get into a little bit of this sort of figuring out this balance, but there's just other needs like, all the programming support, for instance, where we maybe just don't have as much of an across the board demand for that type of skill set after this project is wrapped up.
Can you help me understand a little about the geotech stuff? I know a lot of the cost overruns are being dumped on that, but haven't we done a lot of geotech? I mean, didn't we tunnel into the Greenway and, we extended our sewer lines? I feel like we're always digging. So why is this project so much different than all the other stuff we've done?
Sure. I think, first and foremost, just to get the obvious out of the way, it's just a much larger, more involved, complex effort. We are digging, 3 linear tunnels under a creek, daylighting at a quarry, interfacing with our facilities on the 2 creek site, close to 300-foot, 35-foot diameter shaft. When, you can sort of say under the umbrella of geotechnical work, yes, we have seen a lot of, basically digging on very tough diabase rock that we have in this area. That's already a challenge in and of itself. But I think the challenges associated with this project really do go beyond that and sort of into that next level of complexity and just magnitude of scope that I feel really sort of warrants a more specialized, dedicated treatment.
Mr. Allen, I have a quick anecdote because I think what you brought up was a great point. If others here may recall, there was the True North data center complex off of, I think it's Sicklen Road, and they were, as a developer project, tunneling under the Greenway, and they ran into a whole host of problems. I think they buckled the Greenway, and it's that level of risk. And, that project was delayed for a long, long time. It's just a quick example of the complexities that we could run into or the risks that we're trying to help mitigate with the support that we're asking.
We're not going to buckle the Greenway with this project. Right?
I think, put differently, the risk of Goose Creek and
right. As long as we don't drain the creek into the quarry, that I'd probably call that a win.
Mr. Koblis has a question.
Okay, thanks, Jewel. I have 2 questions. The first question is the actual fee that Arcadis has. Is it presented as an hourly estimate with all the different engineering people, by hours for each area of trying to think of the word, but each process that they're doing.
Scope element, each
And
scope
then
element.
Because when I used to do stuff for the government, I mean, it took me hours to put these things, days to put these presentations together. And since the way this is set up, by the state of Virginia, we can't really say no, it seems, but I was just wondering how that's presented. And then the second question is, did Black and Veatch actually review and approve their fee? That's all.
So that's correct, Mr. Kobles. So important probably to recognize that, yes, we are building these as sort of hourly not to exceed based fees, sort of maximum not to exceed. From that standpoint, it's not really that different than how we build up any other fee, not just for our construction services, construction administration contracts, but also for our design contracts. We have all the different subtasks that go into the support of this work. RFI response might be one single item submittal. Review and response might be a separate subtask, and so on and so forth until we have all of the services we need. Then we have categorized labor categories, right? That sort of build up the type of support and effort we need for each of those subtasks across the full duration of the project, assign a budget of hours to that. Inevitably, consultants are a bit conservative with that initial stab at it. Then we go in, we right size it, we scrutinize it, we refer back to our historical metrics to make sure that they are providing the adequate level of support. Then we go back and forth for a few weeks until we agree to disagree and get ready to present the number before the committee here. But there is a lot of I'll say negotiation that goes into ensuring that we are carrying the right amount of effort. There are some assumptions. In the case of submittals, we look at the specs, technical specifications across the entire project, and basically perform a count, assume a rate of resubmittals, and come up with a number of hours based on an assumed number of hours per item, and then develop it that way. For RFIs, for claims, it's a little harder. We rely more on historical metrics. You don't really know how many claims you're going to get, and consultant is not going to come right up front and say, I anticipate that there's going to be a lot of controversy around my design, and so we'll need more, we'll need less. So we sort of refer more to actuals that we've seen historically across different projects of the same sort of magnitude and complexity to come up with some of those assumptions. So I hope that answers your question, Mr. Kobles, but we can get more into sort of how we develop that fee if needed.
If I may, it's probably a great point to reflect back. We've reached the end of the pre-construction phase of this project, the design work in essence, and we had contracts out to Clark, Black and Veatch, and Arcadis for that work. This staff before you, they manage those carefully, and we even have an exhibit we can share call to here later in the presentation. But we've been tracking that all along the way, and we expect those 3 contracts to close significantly under budget. So in the same vein as how these estimates are built up on the time and material basis, we track that, we manage it very closely, and we oftentimes do see savings at the end when the PO is closed.
Is that just on the construction services side that we expect them to be significantly under, or is that the whole project?
I'm really just calling back to the design phase as an example,
okay.
But as an indicator for what we may do with these contracts as they are approved and managed through the life of this contract.
So Arcadis, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Who is the construction? I haven't heard the term there. Construction manager at risk. Who is the construction manager? Is that Clark? So as I understand, when we talked about this before, they assume a higher level of risk. They basically step into our shoes as owner if there are cost overruns and so forth. So their involvement at the very beginning is a little different than a normal contract, so that they have an input into design and costs and so forth. And so they have much more influence in the beginning, so that if we do enter into problems, they're at risk. Am I getting that right? Or
Yeah, and then that's sort of taking us back to sort of the differentiators for this work, right? Under the CMAR structure, yes, the CMAR assumes a certain degree of risk over the work performed by their subcontractors, who are it's a numerous bunch, right? We've seen how many subcontracted packages are involved in the execution of this work. If we call back to our construction award presentation, right? So yes, and another distinction, right? For this project, when we refer to the construction manager, it might be different than the way we use the term for other projects where maybe we use construction administration, construction management interchangeably. I think for the purposes of this project, just because of the way CMAR works and how it's defined under the contract, Clark Construction really acts as the construction manager in charge of all of the subs that essentially execute the work.
I believe Mr. Koblis had a second question. Was the question, does Black & Veatch help us review the invoicing in the accountability of these tasks? Was that the question, Mr. Koblis?
No, my question was, did Black & Veatch review this estimate of design, construction, administration services by Arcata, and did they approve it?
I wouldn't say they approved it. They assisted in the development and supported the development of primarily the needs of the project during construction, right? Being that they are much more experienced and carry that CMAR expertise, they understand the challenges that come into play during the execution of CMAR projects. They advised us on the right level of support to take on certain tasks and anticipated efforts and challenges that we'll see during construction, but they didn't really approve. They have their own sort of interest in this, obviously, and so we more relied on, their advice, and they were definitely consulted on the development and the right size of these tasks, but they don't really approve them per se.
Well, I think that's a mistake. I mean, Black & Veatch was hired by us as an expertise design firm. They should be the guys that are approving and reviewing these type of estimates for design. I mean, that's their job. That's what they do. That's why we hired them. Anyway, I guess that's a no.
Mr. Koblis, I'm just gonna to kind of finish off this thought. They have been a second set of eyes for us all along the way, and I'm not trying to refute what Sam was saying, but perhaps not reviewing each and every line item of Arcadis's estimate, but in the big picture of the scope of services and what it will take for delivering this project, they've been with us hand in hand all along the way in preparation of the contract and just the breakout of the work. So in a certain sense, they have assisted in this along the way.
Well, and maybe not to put too fine a point on it, and maybe Savita can assist with this. I think VPPA requires us to retain the services of an advisor on this CMAR project, and it's not as much, Mr. Koblis, a firm with design expertise as much of one that was, required for us to enter into a contract with to support us and ensure that we are carrying out the CMAR delivery method in accordance with those regulations. Do I have that accurately, Savita?
Correct. Yes.
Is it an ethical problem to have one design firm approve the cost of another competitive design firm?
That's
Thinking about that.
that's part of what I was trying to get to earlier.
Add that,
It doesn't
we
wash
can't
right.
really show Black & Veatch Arcadis's rates, their multipliers, right? I mean, that is, I don't know if ethical is the right word, but certainly not good business practice for us to share the details of how Arcadis comes up with the cost. Now, we could show hours, right, per discipline, if we wanted them to look at that. They certainly did provide input on things like the scope of services, what the Black and Beach, developing what the scope for Arcadis would look like and what their scope would look like. We just did not share with them the actual financial details for the buildup of their price.
Just doesn't see, there's something about that that doesn't wash right.
Correct.
I appreciate you saying it more directly because I think I meekly sort of threw in a statement that was meant to, express something. But yes, that is sort of partly and mostly really the reason why we just simply can't, have Black and Beach approve the Arcadis scope per se.
I'm going to change the subject slightly here, but call to another example. And that is with the actual construction contract, which you awarded last week. As we opened bids on the construction contract, we were seeing significantly higher pricing. And since mid-July, we worked hand in hand with Arcadis and Black and Beach, but largely Black and Beach to help negotiate and bring that cost down significantly to the contract value that you awarded last week. And so I just give that as another example by which they are supporting us in, really squeezing the best value out of this delivery method. And I mean, having lived it the last 4 months, I wholeheartedly believe in this delivery method for this project and this board's decision to lead us there. I just envision the cost of this program would have been significantly higher had we gone the traditional design bid build route. So again, just offering that as an example by which we've also obtained value with Black and Beach's services.
And piggybacking on that, Arcadis's fee is hourly, not to exceed. That's how it's structured.
That's how it's built up, yes.
Okay. 'Cause there's so many variables in this thing. I mean, I don't know. It just feels very complex.
Yes, and I'm glad it's sort of a recurring theme because it sort of sets up another sort of important aspect of the request that we're bringing before you this morning. I feel like we maybe spent a lot of time sort of going over this very sort of more granular breakdown in the preceding slide here, but this sort of also contextualizes the Arcadis services against some of the other roles and responsibilities that we see from the other parties involved here, and really serves to sort of start highlighting, right, the differences between what they are doing and providing what we call basic services, the resident engineer, submittal RFI review, document control, versus some of the additional services that are more unique to this project, such as geotechnical support and things like that. But also, operational phase services, as we've referred to them in the past, startup and commissioning of a new facility, greenfield facility, SCADA PLC programming. These are things that we see more on the sort of broad run type, projects or greenfield projects, not necessarily services that we see as a part of the typical project that we administer here. So with that in mind, and with Mr. Campbell, what you were bringing up and others have brought up this morning, we felt when we looked at the overall 52-month duration of this thing, we felt like there was opportunities to really split things out, reassess as we go during construction, look back at our assumptions and how things have played out, and really take an opportunity to right size the remaining sort of operational support services, automation and programming, things that don't necessarily have to be approved. Once we've gotten, through, let's say, halfway through the project and we have more certainty on what those needs are, and take stock on not just how things have gone from a construction perspective, but have we hired more staff at that point that can go in and support certain aspects of this work? And can we make some adjustments as we go? Inspection staff, which we'll get into a little bit more on the Black and Beach side, and sort of adjust as we go there.
I have one other question, which is getting off the subject a little bit. What about the selection of subcontractors? Who has the final, do we have the approval? If we don't want John Q. Public as a subcontractor, who has the say on that? Do we have a say?
We do, and we were advised by Black and Beach as well on that. But I think ultimately, I feel comfortable in saying we had full veto power. And so, if there was a subcontractor that we don't know that came in extremely low, that didn't necessarily mean that that would have been our choice. If somebody who we know and trust is only, 0.5% higher than the lowest bid, of course, we would sort of look at that and reassess and make a decision based on value and not necessarily just a
They
low
have to-
bid.
Clark's got to submit that to you guys.
That's correct.
Yes. In general, Mr. Sultan, we have veto power over all subcontractors on CA services and design task orders as well.
But that doesn't in any way weaken their position, since that's one of the benefits is they get to pick the subcontractors. They can't come back later and say, well, you didn't want the subcontractor and look what happened.
Yeah, I could see an argument.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I think, the way that it really worked was when they submitted their bids, they actually put together a bid analysis for us on every single package. So we saw the costs that were submitted and each subcontractor that submitted it. They then provided their perspective on who they thought was qualified. In some cases, we actually did get submissions from firms who were not qualified to do the work, even though they were the low bid, right?
So that's already been.
That's part of the
That's part of the
construction
construction
contract. And so we actually went through the process with them to kind of work through each package and determine, they provided their recommendations. In some cases, there were firms that submitted that they were not comfortable working with, and they told us that, and then we would have a discussion about it, so.
If you push back and they ultimately say, okay, we agree, and that's it, they've agreed and move forward, and they can't call back at some point in the future and say, well, somebody, they've this upfront and
Yeah.
before you even
Yes.
begin, okay.
And I chuckled a
It's done.
little bit because I've seen contractors before, maybe not outside of the CMAR context. If we sole source a piece of equipment, for instance,
Mhm.
they might build an argument around the fact that they didn't have a choice in the matter. But I think ultimately, and inevitably, the letter of the contract ends up prevailing regardless.
Right. Okay.
So is Arcadis doing all this engineering, or they're subcontracting to Dewberry and Bowman and this and this and this and this, or how is that working?
The only major subcontractor here has to do with the geotechnical support that they're providing under this bit of the chart here.
Okay.
And that's really who assisted them in the development of the design for that portion of the work anyway, right? So it's really retaining the services of somebody who's very familiar and has all the expertise to bring to the table from that.
Is it
from that
one of the
perspective.
local geotech firms?
It's Schnabel Engineering.
Schnabel?
Novel engineer.
Okay.
Urban also does have a small component. They assisted with all the site civil work and the permitting with the county and all that. So they do have a small task order, but it's quite small in
Right.
proportion to the overall fee. But Schnabel is their main sub, and they were the geotechnical designer of record for the,
Other than Schnabel doing all the geotech and Urban having a small role, everything else is in-house to Arcadis?
That's correct. So as we've been building up to here, we are requesting approval today of what we are calling, again, basic and additional services, and additional should mean, largely that geotechnical component that I referenced earlier, for a total of around $8 million. And then, we'll return to CIP committee to request approval for operational phase programming and automation services at a later date, deferring that, like I've said before, sort of allows some flexibility and degree of control as we administer these initial approvals during construction and see where we're at, better understanding of needs, less uncertainty, et cetera. But we are presenting the full budget here at around $11 million. I think one of the things we might see when we come back to request approval for items 3 and 4, we'll be able to have a better understanding of actuals and reforecast to provide an adjusted and hopefully more appealing bottom line number here for the total.
I see that you're using as a benchmark certain percentage of construction cost. That's when talking about a normal design bid project.
Correct.
Do you have any benchmarks that you can compare to other CMAR projects with this, for similar percentages? Am I making myself clear?
Yeah, and part of the nuance there might be that, with the probable exception of Black and Beach Advisory Services, which we'll get into in the second presentation here, and sort of assisting us and supporting us on the CMAR nuances themselves, it really is much like administering a typical design build project in a lot of regards. Certainly from the standpoint of basic services, we'll receive submittals, we'll receive RFIs, claims, we'll be dealing with a lot of the same challenges, and the CMAR component is more a force driving the needs sort of during pre-construction, during this best value selection process, development of new documents, right? I think once you get into construction, that sort of distinction becomes a little less impactful on the services that we'll need and the drivers. So one thing we have brought, right, is some comparison with some of our larger projects and some of the projects that require full-time inspection field management as identified by the single asterisk there. And from that standpoint, we're pretty much well in line with similar efforts over at Brought Run and Trap Rock for the construction of that facility. There are any other questions? I'll take them now.
Any other questions? Certainly asked to none. I'll make the motion. I move the recommendation to the board to approve a contract amendment for engineering services during construction for the Milestone Reservoir and Pump Station project to Arcadis for $7,910,700 with an approximate 5% contingency to be controlled by the general manager for a total authorized budget of $8,306,200. Additional costs will require board approval. Do I have a second?
This is Jim. I second that.
Who was that?
Jim.
Jim
Jim.
Bonfils.
Mr. Bonfils.
Well, everybody who says aye, raise their hand, please.
Aye. Aye.
Did he do? Okay, I guess that's passed. The next item.
Mr. Sultan, did you want that on the consent agenda? There are seven.
There's still a lot of questions. I would say on the action agenda.
Okay, we have 8 members on right now.
The 9 members here, so let's just knock it down. We don't need to do it again.
All right, we'll go on the consent.
Consent, please.
So for the Black and Beach task order for construction administration and inspection services presentation, I'll acknowledge right up front that we built these presentations up to stand up on their own, right? So there's a lot of similarities. I'll try to get through those quickly in the interest of time here, but we'll follow a similar agenda with some additional bits of information that are more relevant to these services. And of course, we've maybe said more than we were planning to about Black and Beach's involvement during the pre-construction phase and why we feel like they would be a valuable asset to us during construction. But I do want to highlight right up front, the third-party quality assurance bullet here, which is, something that we I feel like in the past, we've gotten into some debate about, engineering firms handling that quality assurance during construction. And this is part of the value that Black and Beach will bring as an entity separate from the design firm that was with us since the inception here. But other than that, We have inspections needs that we simply, are not currently equipped to handle on our own. We have the on-site management construction administration that we talked a little bit earlier in the other presentation about. We also have additional services associated with estimating and scheduling that are going to be instrumental in helping us navigate claims, disputes, and just the overall administration of the contract. And there is a very, very important materials testing and specialty inspections component built into this task order, which, if you can imagine a concrete line, 300 foot, 35 foot diameter shaft and all the concrete that's going to be placed to support that, plus the tunnels, plus the construction of the pump station itself, compaction testing for all of our pipelines and subsurface features, they'll bring a lot of value that, it's actually required for this type of work. Yes, Mr. Sultan?
I had a question. Why would materials testing not be under Arcadis? I mean, what's different about this project? I mean, we know that the administration of the project's different, but materials testing is materials testing.
So maybe if I go back one slide, and this, I feel like the button to go back is not working for me right now, but it sort of falls in line with the third-party quality assurance. Thank you for that. The idea that, Black & Veatch is acting more as a quality assurance firm on this particular project, it sort of provided another opportunity to keep that separate from engineering services during construction and Arcadis's role on this project. Yes, in other projects, mostly because that's the one entity we have supporting us during construction, it's always sort of built in. But since we are sort of handling inspections separately here, we thought it would be most appropriate to carry that under the Black & Veatch umbrella.
It seems strange that it wouldn't be under the design engineer.
It's atypical for us. Yes, correct. So this sort of gets into a little more granular detail of what those categories encompass, but it's all pretty much self-explanatory in the case of Black & Veatch here. So we have construction administration and the additional services associated with quality assurance and inspection. Here's sort of a breakdown in fee of how those two items are split. And so the total buildup of that fee to support the project across 52 months of construction turns out to be around $7 million. But and I'll probably skip one slide to that here and just tackle this up front. There are VPPA-driven individual task order limits, maximum amounts that we can't exceed with a single task order. So for that reason, and for the reasons that we've talked about, taking that as an opportunity to right size, come back to the committee and to the board with updates on how things are going and really better understand what we're dealing with a little bit less uncertainty as we build up future tasks. We thought it would be ideal for this task order to limit it to a year one budget. So that's the remainder of 2023 plus all of 2024, identify with a little more precision the needs for that year, and then come up with a recommended motion here of $1.5 million to support the budget for that first year of services. The idea being that every year we would come back, report, and present on next year's budget until we hit the end of the construction phase.
I still don't agree with moving materials testing to Black & Veatch, but the money's gonna come from same place anyways. It doesn't really matter. But,
Yeah, maybe I could offer a little perspective. So typically, we'll use phase two as an example, right? All of the engineering services are handled by Hazen, and there is some, I believe, additional inspection support, right? and other services, but it's all provided by Hazen. There is no third party. In this case, Black and Beach is providing inspection services to supplement our inspectors. We don't have the capacity to fully staff on the inspection side for this project. And that's sort of the quality assurance part. So adding then the additional quality assurance testing kind of puts all of that under one entity.
Are there any other questions? I'll make the motion. I move the recommendation to the board to approve a task order for construction administration and inspection services for the Milestone Reservoir and Pump Station project to Black and Beach for $1,520,000. Additional costs will require board approval, and we're talking about putting this on the consent agenda.
Second.
Call for a vote. Everyone saying aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, next item. Approval of professional services contract for record drawings and GIS data.
Thank you.
Great, here we go. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and tee this one up for Brendan here. You know, in many of these committee meetings and board meetings, you see some really detailed, amazing maps of our water and wastewater systems. And you may have wondered, how do we create those maps? And so today's presentation should answer that question for you. Our record drawings and GIS data production program started back in 2007. And it produces really high quality data for us. Many of our business records have kind of a short shelf life, relatively speaking, but the data that's produced by this program is maybe used 50 or even longer, as long as the life of the assets. So it's really important that we get this data right. And again, this is how we do it. It really ensures, so I think a key part of this is we take control of the data production process. Many other organizations allow developers to do this mapping as the final step in a project. By taking control of it, we really ensure that it's high quality data. So this program has been in existence, as I mentioned, since 2007. Brendan has worked on this program now for, I think it's about 6 years, and now leads this for us. He's a senior GIS technician in the technology services department. And so I will turn it over to him for this contract approval.
All right, thanks for that great introduction, Mike. My name is Brendan Blee. I'm in the Technology Services Department here at Loudon Water. And I'm going to present to you on the award of basic ordering agreement contracts for record drawing, production, and GIS data capture services. So a little bit of history on the record drawing and GIS data program. This is essentially Loudon Water's process to map all newly constructed water, wastewater, reclaimed water, yard piping assets. The pilot was started in 2007. As Mike said, we've been doing this for 16 years now, so it's a very mature process. We've always used multiple blanket ordering agreements, so we've always picked multiple vendors for each one of these programs. And since its start, we've completed over 1,600 projects. Those range in scale from a single meter install all the way up to a major subdivision. And we've mapped over 5 million linear feet of pipe. And pretty greatly, most of the costs are recovered through our record drawing fees, which are paid by developers. So it's a revenue neutral program. So the scope of the data capture. So once we assign a vendor a project, they go out and survey all the visible assets. That includes pipes, valves, meters, manholes, vaults, all sorts of stuff. Then they mark up the engineering design drawings. These are also called record drawings or as-builts. So they overlay the survey data with the as-builts and they say, what's changed, what's different. So we have a picture here in the center that's showing that they found a manhole that was probably like 10 feet from where it was designed to have been built. So that was marked up on the record drawings. Then they take all the information from the as-builts and the survey data and they deliver to us, which is called a geographic information system or GIS mapping data. And then they give back the GIS mapping data and the as-built to us where it goes through an internal QA/QC process. And then once we've verified that everything's good, we upload the GIS data into SAP where it creates a record for asset management to track those assets through their lifetime. And then at the conclusion of all of that, the GIS and the as-built data is made available to the rest of the company for use, or it's used by asset management through utility protection, customer service, master planning, various departments. So our request for proposal, so the current BOAs expire in the beginning of January 2024. The new RFP was advertised at the beginning of August. We had a 7-person evaluation committee, which is made up of various stakeholders for the record drawing program. And I'm going to just go over our evaluation criteria scoring matrix really quick. So we received 7 proposals. The main thing that we were interested in reviewing was the quality review process for all these different vendors. We wanted to make sure that they had a lot of checks in place to make sure that we were getting quality GIS, record drawing, and survey data from them. Then we looked at the qualifications of the individuals. We wanted to make sure people who are actually doing the work were qualified to be doing that work. So did they have good GIS people? Did they have good surveyors? Did they have good record drawing people? So then we looked at the management approach of the vendors. We wanted to make sure that they had enough staff, they had enough hours for those staff, they had licensed surveyors for Virginia, that sort of thing. And then, of course, we looked at their past experience. We wanted to make sure they had tackled similar projects in the past, such as GIS jobs and survey jobs. And of course, it was a bonus if they had done both. And then the miscellaneous category was actually used by the selection committee to review the quality of the actual proposal documents. And that's what made up our 100 points. So our staff recommendation of the 7 proposals that we reviewed, we shortlisted 5 and interviewed those people. And then we picked 4, and those are A. Morton Thomas, Surveying and Mapping, Wallace Montgomery, J2 Engineers. So we recommend the award for 1-year BOAs with the option of 3 1-year extensions. So that's 4 years at maximum at Loudon Water's discretion. And this is our recommended motion.
So going back real quick, so we got these 4 that we'd have these basic ordering agreements with, these 4 on the right.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can use any one of them for any given project.
Correct.
And how's it work? So they got a guy out there surveying, and then that goes in a CAD, presumably.
Mm-hmm.
And then from CAD, somebody in their GIS group turns it into a shape file.
Yep.
What kind of shape files are we using, or how does that, is it, do we have a criteria for that? I know there's a couple different types of shape files and so forth. Do we have a criteria, or do we just let them pick how they deliver it?
Right. So we have a schema that we provide them, and then they deliver the GIS data in that schema, and it comes back in sort of like a folder to us.
Okay.
I have a question for you. What did you call it? What kind of file?
It's what GIS is shape files. So the engineering, you use CAD, generally AutoCAD, but then to transmit it into GIS, do we use like an Esri based system?
Mm-hmm.
So you have shape files, and there's different types of shape files, but it's just it's the format that's used for GIS. Yeah.
Just curious, I see Dewberry and Timmons, which were an original, I guess the 2018 BOA. They're no longer there. Just did they put in proposals for?
Dewberry did not, Timmons did, and so we haven't done formal debriefs with those firms yet. But Timmons didn't make the short list, and we didn't get a proposal from Dewberry, so we'll look into that.
Did they perform? Just curious. With did they were they awarded a lot in terms of the original BOA in 2018, or was it?
Yeah, I can answer that. So AMT has been probably our strongest performer out of the original group. Dewberry received a fair amount of work. Timmons received relatively less.
Okay.
They were not, frankly, the strongest performer prior in the prior contract. And in fact, we've seen this in prior cycles. I think this is the fourth renewal of this cycle of contracts that we've done. And so in each of those cycles, we've wound up dropping or awarding less work to at least one of those contractors because they don't meet our quality standards. That's just been pretty typical.
Yeah, understood. All right, thank you.
Is this Morton Thomas, are these local or do they have to kind of drive in for these projects or how does that work?
I believe the furthest one away is Sam, which is in Gainesville.
Okay, so they all have local offices and things.
Mhm.
That's nice. Great. And then do we share any of this GIS stuff with the county? I know they've got their own GIS mapping group and so forth.
We
We
do.
share some of this?
We do.
We share all of it or just portions of it?
Some of it. We have a biweekly exchange with them where we pull in like parcel data from their databases and we provide them with stuff such as like the fire hydrant locations for the fire marshal and some other things.
Yeah. Very great.
Have to read a motion again.
Any other questions?
I'll clear your throat.
What's that?
You're reading a lot of motions.
You're the reader this morning.
Hey, I'm lucky I can see that. Okay, the recommended motion. I move the recommendation to the board to authorize the general manager to execute one-year basic ordering agreements with A. Morton Thomas and Associates, J2 Engineers Incorporated, Survey and Mapping Incorporated, and Wallace Montgomery, with the option of 3 one-year extensions for surveying and engineering services.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent presentation.
Mr. Lipinski. Capital spending report. Any questions?
The
No?
actual is below the projection, so that's good. That's my detailed financial analysis.
Okay, do I have a vote to adjourn? All in favor?
I'm
Aye.
sorry, Mr.
Motion.
Sultan, I must have missed if we were putting the last item on consent or action.
Oh, consent.
Consent, thank you.
You expect me to read it and also under? All right, I guess we're adjourned. Okay.
No, we need a motion. Did we
What's
get-
that?
Yeah,
I made the motion to adjourn.
second.
Oh. All in favor? I
Aye.
thought we already did that.
We have to be
Okay.
official.
Thank you.